Hello, everyone. Welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it's your online social psychology course, and I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in social cognition. With that said, let's jump right in. Beginning with the Gestalt school. This school of thought really primarily focuses on how people construct their understanding of reality. The mind actively selects pieces of information and organizes these into knowledge networks. Do you see a vase or two faces? The mind plays an active part in how we construct reality. So you've kind of initially learned about the Gestalt School in probably your Gen Psych / Introductory Psych course. Again, kind of the idea here is kind of thinking about how people categorize information, how people interpret images presented in front of them in multiple ways. And also kind of what are some kind of theoretically universal or at least culturally specific ways of interpreting ambiguous stimuli. So on the right-hand side, kind of an example here, there are at least two possible interpretations of this, a vase or two faces. The point being here is that this chapter heavily focuses on how people characterize or categorize the pieces of information around them, people, objects, interpretations of the world, and what kind of shortcuts or heuristics they rely on. Let's review some motives behind thinking. Everything thinking about the social world is largely a matter of choices, many of which are made without conscious awareness. There are three motives which influence choices according to the theory of lay epistemology. That is the need for accurate knowledge, the need for closure, and the need to confirm what one already believes. So let's walk through each of these needs, beginning with accuracy. Sometimes thinking is guided by a motive to achieve an accurate, truthful understanding of a given person, idea, or event. For example, if an employer is looking over a job application, she might be motivated to know for sure whether an applicant is qualified for a job, and so she will invest a lot of time and energy in thinking about the applicant's resume. Thinking carefully takes time and energy, however, resources that are in short supply. Motivation to reach closure by making any choice or by making a certain choice is sometimes stronger than our motivation to make the most accurate choice. So depending on our context in the given situation, the motives that we rely on can vary. So in this case here, we have our example of accuracy, a scenario wherein you need to be theoretically highly accurate, and that is reviewing job applications, whatever you're hiring a professor or something along those lines. You're like, oh, I need to have someone who can teach this course. So you're going to theoretically spend a lot of time reviewing the applicants' resumes, calling their letters of recommendation writers, doing whatever necessary background checks. But ultimately, this is a long process, and it is conducted in order to ensure as much theoretical accuracy as you can when hiring an employee. You do not want to hire someone who has no teaching experience or whatever, or is an engineer and they're trying to teach, I don't know, a psychology class or something along those lines. However, as stated, time and resources and energy are finite. There are only so many hours in the day, whatever. Time is unreal or something. But ultimately, you're going to get tired. You got to go to sleep. There's other issues that pop up in your life. So considering those finite resources, the need for 100% clarity, certainty is highly unlikely in most case scenarios. Instead, what people will do is trying to seek closure. And when do people seek closure? It's when they need to do so quickly. They're running out of time and resources. So we reach closure in our decision making when we stop the thinking process and grab the first handy judgment or decision quickly and without extensive effort. When stakes are low or just want a decision to be made, people are often content to choose whatever others choose, such as selecting the most popular item at a local restaurant or whatever movie is getting the most downloads. So in this case here, maybe the stakes are far lower. So you're at your favorite restaurant or whatever, a restaurant you've never been to or something along those lines. You're like, oh yeah, I kind of generally like, I don't know, Mexican food or something along those lines. So you don't really care which item you get, and you're really kind of unfamiliar with the restaurants. You're like, yeah, I don't really know. Let me just ask like the waiter, and he will give me a recommendation, and that will be good enough. So you're not just going to theoretically just ask anyone. You're not going to just walk up to somebody on the street and just be like, "Hey, what menu item should I get?" In general. But so you want some level of accuracy, but you want, or I should say, your conclusion to be reached relatively quickly because it ain't that real. You can also see this when people use the YOLO feature in Netflix, where you just have the Netflix pick you a random movie. Who cares? This is good enough. I'm on Netflix. Obviously, everything on Netflix will be good enough anyway. So just have the program pick a movie for me, and then I will daydream through it as I scroll through my phone. Kind of the idea. Stakes are low, good enough. Move on with our life. We made a decision. Confirming what we believe. This is a motive to reach a conclusion that fits well with the specific beliefs and attitudes that one already prefers. If you held the attitude that the movie Joe Dirt is the greatest movie of all time, and you read just one customer review praising the movie, chances are you'll halt the thinking process right there and confidently declare, "Yep, just as I thought, this is a great movie." In contrast, if you hated the movie and read the same review, you would be more likely to continue reading reviews until you found one that affirms your belief that it stinks. And we'll touch more on this later in the lecture. We'll be kind of alluding here to a confirmation bias. But here we have the motivation of thinking, again, confirming what we believe. So the idea being that you do not enter any social scenario with no prior beliefs, attitudes, worldviews. Rather, you have an extensive developmental history in general, depending on the age, but still, even as a child, you get some developmental history. So if you enter pick a garbage movie that you think is actually good, dated someone who thought Baby Geniuses were good. So anything with below 10% on Rotten Tomato. And then you go on there and you're like, "Oh, this is incredible. We are definitely watching this movie that you think is awesome, but may actually be garbage." However, again, if you read reviews, you Google a movie, say your significant other, whoever you're dating, is like, "You know what, this movie actually sucks. I do not want to watch that shit." So then you Google the movie and you're like, "Oh, these reviews are terrible." But then you reach page 7 of Google results and you find someone who loved the movie. And now you have found the real results, the thing that is the ultimate truth. And now you can justify to your significant other, it is time to watch the movie. Your movie choice is motivated by confirming what you already believed. So what are some of our overall takeaways? The need for accuracy is elevated when there are negative consequences for making a poor decision. In contrast, people want to reach closure quickly in situations where thinking is effortful or unpleasant. Under time pressure to make a decision, a lot of things are on your mind, you're exhausted, you can come to a, quote, good enough conclusion. People are motivated to validate what they think they already know or prefer to believe what their prior beliefs and values are brought to mind. Beliefs are central to their sense of meaning in life or personal worth. So again, accuracy when it is a big decision, when you're like, "Okay, I'm going to submit this document to my boss, and this is a big document, and if I screw up, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to bankrupt the company." In that case, the need for accuracy is very high, or you're in deep trouble. Now, again, in scenarios where the consequences are very low, just overall the stakes are low, a low risk scenario, or even if you are actually under a lot of pressure to make a decision. This could be something as benign as, like, again, you're sitting with your significant other. "Oh, we need dinner at 7. We need a movie on. Let's hurry up and make a decision so we don't scroll on Netflix all day trying to pick a movie." Or you got other things, more important things are on your mind. You're thinking about whatever, your favorite sports team, or some food later on, or your vacation, or whatever. Something else is already occupying your conscious attention, and therefore, like, okay, I don't feel like thinking about other things. I don't want to deal with this other shit. Let me just come to, again, a good enough conclusion. Or you're tired, you're fatigued, you don't want to deal with this anymore. You don't want to engage in heavy, complicated, effortful thinking after a long day at work. So again, good enough. And then we have the motivation to validate previously held beliefs. An important kind of component of this, and one possible reason, is that beliefs are not just something we come to a conclusion and we don't, and that's it. We just have them in the back of our head. We believe something and it has no other meaning. No, beliefs are, from the text, they are central to a sense of meaning in life and personal worth. It is how we view the world. It's how we define ourselves. It's often how we define, it is how we define other people. It is our expectations for ourselves, for others. It ultimately serves as a kind of like a social glue of yourself and of your connection to yourself, to the physical world around you, and other people. It helps give you a sense of purpose. So all these kind of central features of like humanity, of existence, are implicated in these prior held beliefs, and that makes depending on the beliefs, and there's a lot of kind of nuance here, but it can make beliefs and values when they're challenged, those can have like existential consequences. And depending on how committed you are to those beliefs and kind of the implications of challenging or quote unquote invalidating those values and beliefs, that can change to or contribute to a whole altercation of or alteration of yourself, of your entire way that you look at the world. So there are social stakes behind kind of the beliefs and values you already have, and thus kind of the need to confirm them, or how a person could act when those beliefs and values are challenged. Let's move on to the how of social cognition. The human brain allows governance of social cognition by two systems of thinking. This, depending on the individual and the circumstances, a person's thought and actions can be directed primarily by one system or the other. First, the cognitive system. This is a conscious, rational, and controlled system of thinking. It uses a system of rules to fit ideas into logical patterns. So, for example, English grammar tells you that something is wrong with, quote, store Jane to the goes. Your cognitive system uses a type of grammar to detect which ideas fit and don't fit. You, quote, choose, for example, to read this book / listen to this lecture. Thus, you're engaging your cognitive system. You're consciously directing your attention to the words that I'm saying, theoretically, or you're on TikTok, and then you're paying attention there. So also conscious. Thinking of concepts and comparing what you are learning from this lecture to your previous knowledge. So core features of the cognitive system include conscious, rational thinking. So you're putting effort into it, commonly known as effortful in cognition nerd shit. So you have conscious. You have sets of rules that you are leveraging to make sense of the world around you. So you can be like, that argument is illogical, or this sentence makes no sense. It's violated the rules of grammar, kind of this, but taking that idea and then expanding it to the social world. So when you choose to do something, when you're studying, for example, you're reading, those are conscious systems of thinking that require you to, again, focus your energy, elaborate, maybe synthesize, but ultimately engage with the material, with whatever you're thinking about in an active, conscious, and rational way. Our second system of thinking is experiential system. This is described as an unconscious, intuitive, and automatic system of thinking. It is guided by automatic or implicit associations among stimuli, concepts, and behaviors that have been learned from experience. The experiential system stores a large collection of well-learned associations. It can be used to make rapid, quote, good enough judgments. And decisions at times when using the cognitive system logical style would be too slow and effortful. So to stop there momentarily, experiential system, it's kind of, you can see kind of in the term a little bit itself, based on kind of previous experiences that you have learned interacting with the world. So a couple of classic examples of this, and again, this is unconscious, can be automatic, is maybe hearing your favorite song in the distance, barely, but you don't fully recognize it, you're not really even thinking about it, and next thing you know, you're singing or you feel better. And despite you not even thinking about the song, You just all of a sudden you're feeling your mood has improved, and this is kind of theoretically the experiential system kind of working in the background. It heard a song that is associated with popular memories, so you hear "No Hands" by Flocka, and you're like, oh, I remember when I was in the club or whatever. This is happening automatically in the background in your mind, your brain. This unconscious automatic processing of that song kind of associated with your times in the club, having fun to Flocka. And then all of a sudden you feel better. And again, this is going on not because you're consciously thinking about all the drinks you were having at the club or all the wild times you had while listening to Flocka. This is happening unconsciously, automatically. Unlike my dog, who is getting into a little mischief right now, but we're going to ignore that. That would be an example of the cognitive system choosing to ignore my dog of being annoying. Next, we have heuristics, which is one kind of form, one way, or I should say construct, that is related to the experiential system. Heuristics are mental shortcuts or rules of thumbs that are used for making judgments and decisions. They influence judgment when real-world stakes are high. Experiential minds are more readily swayed by thinking about what might be lost than thinking about what might be gained. Now, heuristics can vary by culture. So a common example is the more of something, the better. Just kind of a mental shortcut. Or the more expensive something is, the better the better the quality of the product. Obviously, these things, these little mental shortcuts can be useful. There's a difference between a $1 set of sushi from 7-Eleven or whatever gas station sells it, and like $100 set of sushi rolls. So these rules can be useful, they can be accurate, but there are limitations to them, and at times can lead us to incorrect conclusions. So let's review a study from 2016 to make this construct, heuristics, a little more concrete. So imagine that you could win money by closing your eyes and picking a red marble from a jar filled with many other colored marbles. Let's say you could choose to draw a marble from either a small jar with one red marble and 9 marbles of other colors, or from a large jar with 10 red marbles and 90 marbles of other colors. Which jar would you choose? Well, the chances statistically of winning are equal between the two jars. Yet, Verizon in 2016 found a large majority of people chose the large jar with 10 red marbles rather than the small jar with 1, even when they recognized the equal odds of winning. So here we have the same odds, a 1 in 9 chance of grabbing the red marble with your eyes closed. Yet people still choosing at higher rates than expected the larger jar with 10 red marbles and 90 marbles of other colors. So this can be an example of heuristic of more is better. The number 10 is larger than 1, therefore you have more chances of selecting the red marble and winning money, even though, again, the odds are actually identical. So we're using this automatic shortcut, big number, big chance, and then moving on, not really thinking about it, not doing the odds required or the statistical analysis to determine that these percentages of success are equal. Instead, again, using this shortcut to make a relatively quick decision, relying on a construct such as bigger the better or something like that. Which brings us to the dual process theory. So underlining these kind of different systems, these two systems of thinking, that is experiential system and cognitive system. One theory underlying it is this dual process theory. So this theory argues that there are 2 ways of processing information. And there are different ways of information organization, intuitive understanding, and automatic associations among stimuli. These theories argue that, and it can be used to explain a wide range of phenomenon by positing 2 ways of processing information. Because these 2 systems can operate independently of each other, you can focus on your textbooks while unconsciously responding to other stimuli around you. These kind of systems are associated with interrelated brain biochemical and electric reactions. So the big takeaway from the dual process theory is the word dual. We have two of these systems, and ultimately they can operate independently of each other. So while, for example, you're engaging your cognitive system, you are reading your textbook, you are deeply, deeply listening to this lecture, at the same time, you're still unconsciously kind of thinking about the stimuli, your environment around you. So all of a sudden you smell smoke, or something along those lines, and you're like, oh, smoke, fire, something like that. Or smoke, or you hear something in the background, you're like, oh, I forgot that my pasta is on the stove or something along those lines. But that is occurring theoretically independently of you reading the book. So reading the book, at the same time, you smell something, you hear something, ultimately you are unconsciously responding to the stimulus around you, and then that can obviously bring it to the attention of the cognitive system. But ultimately, again, the point being, you can focus on one thing while you're unconsciously responding to and interpreting stimuli in your environment around you. Let's apply this dual process theory to attitudes. Attitudes are operationally defined as emotional reactions to people, objects, and ideas. We have two ways of evaluating something good or bad. First, we have implicit attitudes. These are automatic associations that make up the experiential system, mostly learned from culture, and they lack direct access to information. So again, implicit, kind of automatic, unconscious. These, again, based on experiences in the world that you kind of pick up by living in the world. You can also learn from culture. So we'll get into this more, but parents, teachers, jobs, institutions, political institutions, economic institutions. But ultimately, these are kind of or I should say, kind of structure your kind of automatic associations between two factors, or more factors for that matter. And often you do not have direct access to this information. You are unaware of your implicit attitudes about something. Again, they're automatic, they're unconscious. They're working in the background. So kind of a classic example of this is the implicit association task or test. This task measures the degree to which people mentally associate two concepts. So, for example, flowers and pleasant, essentially by measuring how quickly they can lump together examples of concept one, a rose, a tulip, alongside examples of concept two, happy, lucky, freedom. Now, if you're like a normal, typical person, you're probably quicker to throw these flower and pleasant words in the same mental file folder. You categorize them together. You associate happy with flower. And you would be quicker to do so than to group the same pleasant words, so happy, lucky, great, fun, love it, with insect names such as flea, locust, and maggot. The difference in speed in which you categorize those concepts tells us something about your implicit attitudes towards flowers relative to insects. So, for example, say you have one set of words, and they are flea, maggot, locust. And then you have another set of words, happy, lucky, freedom, whatever. And I force you to have to pick one of those three choices, happy, lucky, freedom, and say it takes you 2 seconds to make that association, to connect flea with freedom. It takes you 2 seconds, all right? Now, say you do it again, and this time you have to associate flowers with happy, lucky, and freedom. And say this time you make that association, you click flowers, you click the word lucky in 1 second. So now you have 1 second it took you to make the association between flowers and happy. It took you 2 seconds to make the connection between maggot and happy. That difference in speed, that 1 second in difference in speed tells you, theoretically tells the researcher that you have a more positive implicit attitude towards flowers than insect, because you took longer to make that association between maggots and happy. It took you 2 seconds versus 1 second for the flower. Now, in actuality, these kind of associations are going way quicker than this. So you're having participants click very, 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 very fast. So what you're trying to do is force them to use their implicit attitudes, their automatic associations, not think about the association between maggot and happy, but again, kind of engage and measure that automatic, implicit, learned attitudes that you associate with flowers, rodents, and a sense of joy. Versus an explicit attitudes people are consciously aware of through their cognitive system. So if I asked you, rate your feelings of maggots on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most pleasant and 0 being the you hate them. That is an explicit attitude. You can sit there and think about how you feel about maggots for an hour and then make a choice. Same thing with flowers as well. But ultimately, you're engaging theoretically a different system of thinking. That is your cognitive system. You're using it's slow, it's effortful, and it's conscious, and you're kind of thinking through your response logically. So let's look at another example here. Nosik in 2005 asked whether participants prefer dogs or cats. What they consciously said, that is their explicit attitude, was that they prefer dogs. So they ask participants, what do you prefer, dogs or cats? Participants, on average, were more likely to select dogs. Responses on a reaction time measure revealed that at an implicit level, however, they associated cats with good more than dogs with good. Perhaps because dogs, or cats, I should say, seldom have a bad reputation as dangerous animals. People's explicit attitudes towards dogs and cats were correlated positively with their implicit attitudes, but only moderately so. So here we ask participants, what do you prefer? What's your attitudes towards dogs and cats? Again, majority of participants select dogs. And then they do this implicit attitudes, this implicit association task. And what the participants found, that participants were quicker to associate cats with words that are good. So excellent, whatever, the synonyms of good, they were more quickly to make that association than the construct or the concept dog with the same words. So good, loyal, whatever the words are. So again, theoretically, that information, that difference in speed, informing the researchers that people on average implicitly associated cats with more positive evaluations. Now, interestingly, participants' explicit and implicit attitudes were correlated, but only moderately so. So although they're correlated, they're not 100% consistent, which in and of itself would be consistent with the dual process theory. That is, two different systems of thinking, and suggests that we're not always aware of our implicit attitudes towards a person, place, or thing in our classic noun definition. Now, here's some interesting results of correlations between people's explicit attitudes on something and their implicit attitudes of something. Again, kind of leveraging that implicit association test versus like explicitly just asking you, do you support this policy? Do you support this product, Coke or Pepsi or something along those lines? And you can again see that these implicit and explicit attitudes are correlated. However, they are not 1.0, aka they are not identical. So correlated, they can range from small to very large, depending on the topic that participants are being asked to report, but ultimately, still regardless, not reaching 1.0. Again, revealing very strong associations, but differences between implicit and explicit correlations, consistent with the dual process model, and kind of a different possible neurological systems that are being leveraged when processing implicit and explicit information. The difference in speed in which you categorize those concepts tells us something about your implicit attitudes towards flowers relative to insects. So for example, say you have one set of words and they are flea, maggot, locust. And then you have another set of words, happy, lucky, freedom, whatever. And I force you to have to pick one of those three choices, happy, lucky, freedom, and say it takes you 2 seconds to make that association, to connect flea with freedom. It takes you 2 seconds, all right? Now, say you do it again, and this time you have to associate flowers with happy, lucky, and freedom. And say this time you make that association, you click flowers, you click the word lucky in 1 second. So now you have 1 second it took you to make the association between flowers and happy. It took you 2 seconds to make the connection between maggot and happy. That difference in speed, that 1 second in difference in speed, tells you theoretically tells the researcher that you have a more positive implicit attitude towards flowers than insect, because you took longer to make that association between maggots and happy. It took you 2 seconds versus 1 second for the flower. Now, in actuality, these kind of associations are going way quicker than this. So you're having participants click very, 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 very fast. So what you're trying to do is force them to use their implicit attitudes, their automatic associations, not think about the association between maggot and happy, but again, kind of engage and measure that automatic, implicit, learned attitudes that you associate with flowers, rodents, and a sense of joy. Versus an explicit attitudes people are consciously aware of through their cognitive system. So if I asked you, rate your feelings of maggots on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most pleasant and 0 being the you hate them. That is an explicit attitude. You can sit there and think about how you feel about maggots for an hour and then make a choice. Same thing with flowers as well. But ultimately, you're engaging theoretically a different system of thinking. That is your cognitive system. You're using it's slow, it's effortful, and it's conscious, and you're kind of thinking through your response logically. So let's look at another example here. Nosik in 2005 asked whether participants prefer dogs or cats. What they consciously said, that is their explicit attitude, was that they prefer dogs. So they ask participants, what do you prefer, dogs or cats? Participants, on average, were more likely to select dogs. Responses on a reaction time measure revealed that at an implicit level, however, they associated cats with good more than dogs with good. Perhaps because cats, I should say, seldom have a bad reputation as dangerous animals. People's explicit attitudes towards dogs and cats were correlated positively with their implicit attitudes, but only moderately so. So here we ask participants, what do you prefer? What's your attitudes towards dogs and cats? Again, majority of participants select dogs. And then they do this implicit attitudes, this implicit association task. And what the participants found, that participants were quicker to associate cats with words that are good. So excellent, or whatever, the synonyms of good, they were more quickly to make that association than the construct or the concept dog with the same words. So good, loyal, whatever the words are. So again, theoretically, that information, that difference in speed, informing the researchers that people on average implicitly associated cats with more positive evaluations. Now, interestingly, participants' explicit and implicit attitudes were correlated, but only moderately so. So although they're correlated, they're not 100% consistent, which in and of itself would be consistent with the dual process theory. That is, two different systems of thinking, and suggests that we're not always aware of our implicit attitudes towards a person, place, or thing in our classic noun definition. Now, here are some interesting results of correlations between people's explicit attitudes on something and their implicit attitudes of something. Again, kind of leveraging that implicit association test versus like explicitly just asking you, do you support this policy? Do you support this product, Coke or Pepsi or something along those lines? And you can again see that these implicit and explicit attitudes are correlated. However, they are not 1.0, aka they are not identical. So correlated, they can range from small to very large, depending on the topic that participants are being asked to report, but ultimately, still regardless, not reaching 1.0. Again, revealing very strong associations, but differences between implicit and explicit correlations, consistent with the dual process model, and kind of a different possible neurological systems that are being leveraged when processing implicit and explicit information. that you previously were unaware of, but now you are aware of. And thus, you can override, you can take action, ladies and gentlemen. You have to be motivated to do so. Kind of straightforward. If you don't give a shit about the implicit attitude that you may displayed, you don't really care if you think that or not. You're not motivated thus you're not motivated to change, to override your thought process, your reasoning. Therefore, you're less likely to do so. So you have to be motivated to want to exert control over your thoughts, your beliefs, and theoretically attempt to change your implicit attitudes. You have to have the ability to do so. So this can range. This is debated. There's different. We'll talk about this later on in later chapters. But let's say, for example, you're too tired. You're cognitively worn out. So at that moment in time, you don't have the ability to engage in those slow, effortful, conscious decision making. Now, again, that is not. There's cultural differences in this and understanding if that's even possible. But again, kind of taking this broadly, if you don't have the ability to engage, to use resources, dedicate those resources to overriding those implicit beliefs and consciously instead thinking through the situation, then you are less likely to be able to override your implicit beliefs. Let's talk about our smart unconscious. There are 5 ways. We have a big 5 ranking. The unconscious is smart. 1, the motives that guide thinking often operate unconsciously. If you ask people why it is they're doing something, they often don't know. This is because, again, we have these many unconscious cognitive processes that inform our behaviors and our modes and our ways of thinking, I should say. Memory consolidation occurs during sleep. Consolidating memories, organizing, solidifying what we've learned and experienced. So, in sleep in general, you are, unconscious or less conscious. Is a more appropriate way of saying this. And during that time, your brain can consolidate memories. Again, organizing what you've learned and experienced while you were awake, maybe while you were more conscious. And not sleeping. So again, sleeping, less consciousness, but you're still processing a lot of information, not just of that day, but previous information maybe from previous days, and organizing, solidifying, coming to conclusions. Unconscious minds wandering can help generate creative ideas. So usually after a period of extensive conscious deliberation on a task. So after thinking something through for a very, very long time, and then you're all there, we've all been there, you can't figure out the solution. Say whatever, you're trying to solve like a math problem, something like that, or maybe you're trying to, you just moved and you're trying to assemble furniture and you're staring at the instructions and you cannot figure it out. And then you're like, screw this, I'm going to walk away. And then like an hour later, you're like, whoa, I got it. I need to turn this shelf around this way and then it's going to fit. So kind of the point being that even after extensive kind of deliberation, so consciously, effortfully thinking it through, then stepping away in the background of your brain, you are still unconsciously processing that information. Thus, whatever, an hour, days later, a week later, something along those lines, like, oh, I know what to do now, or oh, I remember that now, and then boom, you have a solution or a new creative idea. Intuition can facilitate sound decisions. One reason for not acting on unconscious processing is that we often have difficulty verbalizing, that is, putting into words why we like or dislike something. When we think consciously about why we hold an attitude towards something, we often come up with a story that sounds reasonable, but that does a poor job than our gut feelings at predicting later behavior. So the argument here is that because a lot of our attitudes and our behaviors are predicted by unconscious processes or information that is difficult to access, therefore we are unable to verbalize why it is we're doing something. Theoretically, if this if unconscious processing is influencing our behaviors. So that lack of access contributing to decreased ability to verbalize what it is we feel, because we can't access, we don't know exactly for sure, we haven't really deliberately thought about it. We instead kind of give a reason that is easily accessible to us, something that we have thought about before that makes sense because we've thought about it, it's available, that kind of conclusion is available in our brains. Thus we're like, okay, cool, that's good. However, far more easily accessible conclusion can be incorrect. Again, because it's primarily hashtag centered around the accessibility of something, how available it is to you cognitively, not necessarily how accurate it is. Thus, in those scenarios, your analysis of your own behavior kind of decreases the probability that you can predict your future behavior. Because if you don't understand why you're doing something now, you can't verbalize it, and you're relying on these easily accessible kind of stories that make sense with kind of your however you think about yourself, that does not ensure accuracy, and thus you cannot, and you therefore do not understand why you're doing something now. It is difficult to predict how you'll behave in the future because you do not understand the attitudes or whatever the unconscious beliefs that are influencing your current behavior. Unconscious emotional associations can promote beneficial decisions. This is known as the somatic marker hypothesis. This hypothesis argues that certain somatic, that are bodily changes that people experience as emotion. Somatic changes, so bodily changes, become automatically associated with positive or negative context for that emotion. When people encounter those contexts again, the somatic changes become a marker or a cue for what will happen next, helping to shape their decision despite not fully knowing why. So for example, and we'll walk through a more experimental example momentarily, but say you take your hot date to Wendy's. You're like, woo, we're dining big tonight. We're getting the, whatever they call their large meals. We're getting that number 6. That spicy chicken sandwich. So you're there, you're at Wendy's, you're sitting down, and for whatever reason, the tables are decorated red. And you're at Wendy's, and all of a sudden, your hot boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever partner, dumps you right there. And then you're like, oh, that sucked, and you feel like crap. Then, so you have this bodily reaction associated with Wendy's. So now, for example, again, kind of theoretical here, you're driving through Wendy's or you're driving through town, I should say, and you see a Wendy's, and all of a sudden your body, that somatic reaction, that bodily reaction to getting dumped comes back. Because now you have this somatic change associated with Wendy's, or maybe red tables or something like that. You go to McDonald's and you're like, oh shit, they have a red table. And even though you don't consciously thinking this through, but seeing those red tables, sitting down at a different fast food restaurant to eat, you see those red tables, and then unconsciously you have the same bodily reaction, that same tenses, sweating, whatever, from being dumped. So thus the context influencing a bodily change, and that bodily change occurring because the last time you were at a Wendy's or a red table or something along those lines, that you were dumped. So thus that somatic change acts as a marker, a cue of the next thing that'll happen to you. So you'll get dumped while being at the hypothetical McDonald's, instead, even though you originally were dumped at Wendy's. That context, those cues being similar in McDonald's and Wendy's, activating that somatic reaction, and thus demonstrating an unconscious emotional association based on your previous history at Wendy's or red tables. Let's look at an empirical example of somatic markers of risk. So after playing a gambling game with both a high risk and a low risk deck of cards, most people, the controls, exhibit higher arousal just before selecting from the risky deck. Over time, they learn to avoid these risky choices. So basically, you have 2 deck of cards. One is a low risk. Basically, you win a little bit of money almost every time. So through time, you're winning less, but overall, you're going to win more money versus the high risk. So you can win a lot of money, you can lose a lot of money. And through time, the experimenter set it up that you ultimately go bankrupt. So basically, the more trials you allow for participants to play with a high-risk deck or a low-risk deck, control participants are more likely to select the low-risk deck. And these researchers also found that participants exhibit higher arousal, so bodily changes, when selecting from the riskier deck. So maybe, this feeling like, oh shit, maybe they don't consciously know this is a high risk test, but they're like, oh shit, something's telling me that me sweating all of a sudden is a somatic indicator of the emotional association between picking this particular deck and me keep losing a lot of money. So again, that sweating serves as a biomarker of this implicit or this unconscious association between this high-risk deck and losing a shit ton of money. Now, what the researchers did was compare those somatic arousal responses to selecting a deck from a control group to participants who had ventral medial prefrontal cortex damage. So, as a side note, when people just say prefrontal cortex, there's like a million subsections of this, and it's very broad and it has very little meanings. So, and then for our bio nerds, ventral medial, these just basically mean these are directions on where in the particular part of the prefrontal cortex or any part of the brain is located. This is not tested on, but there's your nerd stuff. So anyway, non-ventral medial damage participants showed elevated arousal prior to each pick. They were anticipating that their choice could be a bad one, and they were therefore more likely to learn from their mistakes. However, these the participants with ventral medial damage to their, or I should say, damage to their ventral medial prefrontal cortex, do not show this arousal and do not learn to avoid this risk. And basically, how you can interpret this, or I should say, one way to interpret this is that the damage to the ventral medial prefrontal cortex decreases the neurological ability to form these associations, and thus they're less likely to implicitly learn that the high-risk deck is more risky and they're going to lose a bunch of money. They are not kind of on edge about their selection. They're just YOLO, like picking it, thus kind of less likely to learn from their mistakes. Now here also I'll make the point that these findings are contested. Many of them. There's different theoretical schools of thought. There's different ways to interpret this research, and there's different quality in the research by giving a research study. So, for example, a meta-analysis in 2019 basically found that the effect size of these kind of somatic markers are quite low. So, although they are significant, they're explaining kind of very little of the reason why a person is engaging in a particular behavior. And this is quite common for psychology in general, but especially for social psychology, that many of these kind of effects are often very small because there are a lot of reasons why people do things. So thus, you should not, when writing a paraphrasing assignment, you should not use the word cause, for example, because causation is not measured. And again, there's different interpretations and arguments of the effects of, for example, somatic markers, but also other constructs as well. They also, or in research, this also does not just prove something. No, instead, it is a piece of evidence that can be interpreted in different ways, and there are often conflicting evidence. And meta-analysis are one way that we can kind of measure the the extent that which we know across all kinds of different studies what the true effect size of a given construct is. And again, this 2019 meta-analysis kind of finding small effect sizes. Now, there are also sometimes competing meta-analysis, but this is future stats kind of nerdy stuff. But for now, the point being, don't just look at a construct and be like, okay, well, that is the reason why, especially if you have not really engaged with this or engaged with the literature in kind of in depth. It is a hallmark of kind of pop psychology that's finding kind of like, this is the one reason somebody does things their whole life. And that is basically never the case. Or I should say, one way to interpret this is that the damage to the ventral medial prefrontal cortex decreases the neurological ability to form these associations, and thus they're less likely to implicitly learn that the high-risk deck is more risky and they're going to lose a bunch of money. They are not kind of on edge about their selection. They're just YOLO, like picking it, thus kind of less likely to learn from their mistakes. Now here also I'll make the point that these findings are contested. Many of them. There's different theoretical schools of thought. There's different ways to interpret this research, and there's different quality in the research by giving a research study. So, for example, a meta-analysis in 2019 basically found that the effect size of these kind of somatic markers are quite low. So, although they are significant, they're explaining kind of very little of the reason why a person is engaging in a particular behavior. And this is quite common for psychology in general, but especially for social psychology, that many of these kind of effects are often very small because there are a lot of reasons why people do things. So thus, you should not, when writing a paraphrasing assignment, you should not use the word cause, for example, because causation is not measured. And again, there's different interpretations and arguments of the effects of, for example, somatic markers, but also other constructs as well. They also, or in research, this also does not just prove something. No, instead, it is a piece of evidence that can be interpreted in different ways, and there are often conflicting evidence. And meta-analysis are one way that we can kind of measure the the extent that which we know across all kinds of different studies what the true effect size of a given construct is. And again, this 2019 meta-analysis kind of finding small effect sizes. Now, there are also sometimes competing meta-analysis, but this is future stats kind of nerdy stuff. But for now, the point being, don't just look at a construct and be like, okay, well, that is the reason why, especially if you have not really engaged with this or engaged with the literature in kind of in depth. It is a hallmark of kind of pop psychology that's finding kind of like, this is the one reason somebody does things their whole life. And that is basically never the case. Or I should say, one way to interpret this is that the damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex decreases the neurological ability to form these associations, and thus they're less likely to implicitly learn that the high-risk deck is more risky, and they're going to lose a bunch of money. They are not kind of on edge about their selection. They're just YOLO, like picking it. Thus, kind of less likely to learn from their mistakes. Now, here also I'll make the point that these findings are contested. Many of them. There's different theoretical schools of thought. There's different ways to interpret this research, and there's different quality in the research of giving a research study. So, for example, a meta-analysis in 2019 basically found that the effect size of these kind of somatic markers are quite low. So, although they are significant, they're explaining kind of very little of the reason why a person is engaging in a particular behavior. And this is quite common for psychology in general, but especially for social psychology, that many of these kind of effects are often very small because there are a lot of reasons why people do things. So thus, you should not, when writing a paraphrasing assignment, you should not use the word cause, for example, because causation is not measured. And again, there's different interpretations and arguments of the effects of, for example, somatic markers, but also other constructs as well. They also, or in research, this also does not just prove something. No, instead, it is a piece of evidence that can be interpreted in different ways, and there are often conflicting evidence. And meta-analysis are one way that we can kind of measure the the extent that which we know across all kinds of different studies what the true effect size of a given construct is. And again, this 2019 meta-analysis kind of finding small effect sizes. Now, there are also sometimes competing meta-analysis, but this is future stats kind of nerdy stuff. But for now, the point being, don't just look at a construct and be like, okay, well, that is the reason why, especially if you have not really engaged with this or engaged with the literature in kind of in depth. It is a hallmark of kind of pop psychology that's finding kind of like, this is the one reason somebody does things their whole life. And that is basically never the case. Okay, so let's move on to the what of social cognition. Beginning with categories. These are mental, quote, containers in which people place things that are similar to each other. Even if two things are quite different from one another, two, quote, or I should say two hashtag unique individuals for me personally as a unique individual for existence. So when people place them in the same category, quote, frat boys, they think about these two items as though they were the same. You can lump the pile of items on your spare chair as a chunk. I don't know where to put right now. So depending on the type of knowledge that the schema represents, they're given different names. We're going to discuss three subcategories of schemas. The first are scripts. They are schemas that represent knowledge about events. So playing a game or tennis requires that both you and your partner have a schema of the game so that you can coordinate your actions and follow the rules of the game. Even though you're playing against one another, you are still playing and still leveraging the same tennis script. So the idea of scripts here is that everybody does not have their own hashtag unique for me as a unique individual script. No, there are kind of shared understandings of scripts. That's why there are cultural differences. So people who watch tennis have an understanding of, okay, first you do this, and then they do this, and these are the rules, and this is how you score tennis. So by having similar scripts across the cultures, across countries, the world, whatever the particular script is, you can engage in coordinated activities because you know what to expect. You know what the other person believes about the rules of the game or the norms of the game or something like that. But ultimately, that schema, that script allows you to access a bunch of information about, in this case, tennis, which again allows you to engage in coordinated action. It also allows you to not have to like fill in the details of every single information. So, for example, I say, hey, I went and got groceries today or something along those lines. I don't have to tell you like, okay, I went to the cash register. I stood in line for a cash register. I paid in cash. I used American dollars or the US dollar. These are already implied. This is already understood because we're operating from the same set of schemas. We all have this shared expectation of what it is like to buy groceries in a US grocery store. You can also imagine going to a restaurant. So when you go to a restaurant, you have certain expectations of how you get the bill. So the waiter is going to come up to you and here's the bill and then you pay or whatever, like something along those lines. Well, and when you walk into the restaurant, you wait for the hostess and then they seat you or something along those lines. And then, but however, there are differences. So when I was in the United Kingdom, there's differences in how you pay, for example. So you can just sit there forever waiting for a bill and you don't get the bill. There in some places, you seat yourself or something along those lines. But ultimately, the point being, there are cultural differences in these schemas, in these scripts about your expectations. And a good way to test that again is kind of traveling and going into places that you think you understand. You have an expectation of how a restaurant is going to unfold, but it can be quite different because these expectations are socially, culturally, and historically conventions that people use to operate within their context. Next, we have impressions. These are schemas that represent knowledge about people. So you can have a schema about a certain actor, and you're like, oh, and then your schema is like, oh, that dude is hot, that dude is rich, that dude is an asshole, something along those lines. But you have, again, a set of beliefs about that person. You have expectations about how that person is going to behave. Now, I know I previously said 3 examples or subcategories of schemas we're going to talk about, but I misspoken actually too. So let's continue on. Next, schemas can change. Because of our need to validate and maintain particular beliefs and attitudes, we often tailor our schemas to highlight certain bits of knowledge while pushing others to the edges of the brain. We are not passive. The human brain is not a passive process. We are not computers. So our schemas can change. So maybe we find out information, maybe our worldviews change. Or like, oh, go screw that actor that I thought was super hot and a cool person. Or maybe you are a super fan, a stan of a particular actor. And in that case, you're more likely to have access to and think about positive information about that actor and kind of push to the side things that are like, I don't really want to know that information because then it would challenge my schema, my expectation for that person. With kind of 2 main points here. One, schemas are not a passive process. We don't just take it to like our culture, our mass media, or whatever. Just does not just enter us, and then we have been programmed or something along those lines. No, people are interpreting that information. They're modifying it based on their beliefs and their attitudes, and their previous their worldviews, their developmental history. Ultimately, though, we are not CPUs. We do not. Memory is not just stored in your particular folder, and you open it up, and boom, it's the same memory. We're constantly recreating reinterpreting memories. We forget some things. We learn new things. We interpret things in different lights. And because, as we already talked about in previous slides and throughout this class, is that these schemas have meaning. They represent particular beliefs and attitudes that allow ourselves to imagine ourselves in the world, who we are, what are our expectations for the world, how do we believe other people are going to behave, what is just, what is not just. These are very fundamental to you as a person. And your schemas can reflect those beliefs and attitudes. Now, it's important to keep in mind that beliefs and attitudes are not just hashtag individual. There are collective, countrywide, for example, beliefs and attitudes that are culturally transmitted to people, to citizens, which are then are passed intergenerationally, which of course as well change. So, kind of representing the fluidity of kind of the fact that these are social constructs, social beliefs and attitudes that exist within they're socially constructed. So as such, they can be changed because it's not like a law of nature or something along those lines. But also the social nature of it allows for people to adjust their schemas and interpret and categorize, and I'll just make up a word, schematize particular information based on said beliefs and attitudes. But let's nail down specifically where schemas come from. There are basic ways in which information is categorized and schemas are built. Culturally universal, but the content of those schemas and how they are organized is shaped by cultural experiences. So all cultures have schemas, but the specific content, the information, the expectations, the beliefs, the attitudes are shaped by cultural experiences. Cultural source of knowledge, so direct contact with people, events, and ideas are implicated in the building of specific schemas. Also, indirect contact with parents, teachers, peers, books, newspapers, magazines, television, the internet, institutions, and public policies are also sources of cultural knowledge that shape our schemas. Winkler and Rhodes in 2010 found that kids who grow up in a rural Native American culture that values connections with nature have a concept of, quote, animal that is more closely linked to those species that become part of their daily lives. While white U.S. American kids from the city listed exotic species such as elephants or lions that populate their picture books. Although each group has formed a schema for the category animal, the content of the schema differs in important ways, depending on the values and structures of the group's physical, social, and cultural environment. So here, everybody has a category across all cultures, across the humans, for animal. However, what you expect about animals, how you feel about animals, what their role is in your life are going to vary by cultures. So you can imagine someone in a big city where basically all you see is like a pigeon or something along those lines. You're not seeing that many animals. And you're kind of living a life, broadly speaking, wherein you're not interacting with that many animals, non-human animals throughout the day, maybe some domestic pets and stuff like that. But it's something that's really not involved in your daily life. You're in the city. Animals are kind of maybe in the periphery. So you ask these white U.S. American children to think through animals, to list animals, their schema is more likely to be kind of centered in that context. That urban city environment with not a lot of access to animals. Animals aren't really part of their everyday interactions. Animals aren't necessarily thought of as yourself, as interconnected with you. Again, broadly, just big generalizations here. And as such, the kids are more likely to think of animals that really are involved with their life. So whatever, a lion or an elephant or something along those lines. Versus this rural Native American culture wherein nature, again, broad generalizations here, nature and the interconnectivity of species are fundamental to their attitudes, their belief systems, and their values within this Native American culture. Thus, the animals that they select are animals that they encounter every single day on their daily basis, because those animals represent literally a piece of themselves. So the value of interconnectivity of species, of animals in general, influencing how the schema of animals. So again, demonstrating that there are cultural differences in the specifics of schemas, although schemas as a general construct exist across all cultures. Also, a good example of how something like an institution, a public policy, an economic policy could influence your schema, because your relationship to nature, you're allowed to cut down the trees or something for economic growth or something along those lines. Those are going to influence those belief systems, economic belief systems, political belief systems are going to to also influence your schemas because they're a source of cultural knowledge. Let's move on to rumors, gossip, and mass media. We have rumors and chisme, everyone. These are information about people or events, often passed from one person to another. Information is altered by schemas. Stories are typically simplified, and stereotypes bias recall / retelling. So we'll get into a more specific example, classic kind of example from about rumors and gossip. But in general, we kind of all understand rumors. We know the chisme, we know the tea. Okay, so information passed from one person to another, but the kind of a key takeaways here is that information process from one person to another can be altered by people's schemas. And through time, we've all heard about this like telephone game where the story gets more and more warped the more and more people you tell. This is, again, could be due to schemas, stories becoming oversimplified, and just biases that impact a person processing the information and a person retelling the story to somebody else. And we'll get into more specifics momentarily. Next, we have mass media biases. It can be distorted and biased. For example, mass media tends to portray romantic relationships and love in oversimplified ways. They portray men, women, and ethnic groups in stereotypical ways and show a lot of violence. People who watch a lot of television think that crime and violence are far more prevalent in the world than they actually are, according to a 1999 study. And these are a whole host of reasons. One, entertainment. Two, you gotta keep people watching the television show. So the classic, if it bleeds, it leads kind of situation people will watch. And depending on a culture's stereotypes against a particular race, ethnicity, group of people, these cultural products can reflect those broader cultural biases and stereotypes, and thus portray certain ethnic groups or whatever group in kind of stereotypical, kind of flat, one-dimensional characters, oversimplicity, kind of the idea. And then we have this kind of a television and crime situation. And there's some other resource supporting this. So despite that, the statistics in the U.S. Overwhelmingly demonstrate that crime has basically gone down for decades, much more violent, the 60 years ago, for example. People who, if you watch more television, more likely kind of to think that crime is like massively increased or higher than it's ever been or something along those lines. So let's review this 1947 gossip study. Here, Allport and Postman recruited a sample of white North American participants. Each participant was shown a picture depicting a scene on the New York subway involving a white man standing, holding a razor, and pointing his finger at a black man. After reviewing the picture, the participants were asked to describe the scene to another person who had not seen the picture. That second person then described the scene to a third person, and so on, until the information had been conveyed to a seventh person. More than half the time, the seventh person reported that the scene involved the black man rather than the white man holding the razor. This suggests that when information is filtered through lots of people, it is likely to be biased by culturally prevalent schemas, including group stereotypes. So this is kind of going back to an earlier point, depending on kind of a country's stereotypes and oppression towards particular groups in a given historical period, those can influence a person's schema, and consequently how information spreads. So you can imagine, you don't have to imagine, but hear about whatever this is, math 53, 70, they're about 80 years ago. In a historical period in the United States where racism was much more explicitly stated, here this can potentially impact these schemas and thus more likely to kind of leverage stereotypical beliefs from the given culture. So here, eventually, so again, to reiterate here, the original scene is a white guy threatening a black guy with a knife or something along those lines. And then as that information spreads to participants, it eventually becomes that the black man was threatening the white guy with the razor or knife, whatever it is. And this is interesting to keep in mind that this is kind of within a controlled environment wherein the stakes are very low. And maybe a scenario wherein there's social pressure to adhere to those stereotypical beliefs, these kind of effects could be stronger. So how do schemas work? Accessibility. This is the ease to which people can bring an idea into consciousness and use it in thinking. Salience, an aspect of schema that is active in one's mind and consciously or not colors perceptions and behaviors. When a schema is highly accessible, the salience of that schema is increased. It is activating the person's mental system, even if she is not consciously aware of it, influences perceptions and behaviors. In priming, this is a process by which exposure to stimulus or stimuli in the environment increases the salience of a schema. This occurs when something in an environment activates a schema. It happens because the information that we store in memory is connected in associative networks. Through these mental links, priming, or quote, turning on, one idea will bring to mind other ideas that are closely linked in a person's associative network, but will be less likely to bring to mind ideas that are not strongly linked. So beginning with accessibility, so how quickly can you access an idea, a thought, those that can influence the strength of a schema. So salient is kind of a degree to which a schema is active in a person's mind. So when something is highly accessible, that is, it's information that's readily available that you can get to. That could be any kind of a stereotype or assumption or beliefs about a group or a person or whatever, a sports event, something along those lines. So when that schema is highly accessible, the salience, the power, the activity of that schema increases, even if a person is not consciously aware of it. So you have accessibility, and then you kind of have like the strength, the activity level, which is salience. So accessibility, and then kind of strength, activity level, salience. And then priming. This is when a stimulus, maybe an object that exists in your environment, activates a schema. So something about that stimulus, that object activates that schema. And why is that? Is because of this idea of associative networks. So that object turns on a schema, and thus kind of the belief systems associated with that schema is now active, much more accessible and salient in a person's mind. And objects are more likely, particular objects are more likely to activate or prime particular schemas. And we're going to get into more specifics momentarily. But kind of the idea here is that there's a stimulus in the environment and it activates, increases the salience of a schema. It is the trigger. It is the thing that turns on the light switch situation here. And what is turning on is the schema. Now let's break down associative networks in more detail. Associative networks are defined as models for how pieces of information are linked together and stored in memory. These links result from semantic associations and experiential associations. They are influenced by your developmental history and your personality. Beginning with semantic associations, we're going to define both semantic and experiential associations. Semantic associations are mental links between two concepts that are similar in meaning or that are parts of the same category. For example, nice and kind. So they're similar meaning, nice and kind, almost like synonyms or part of the same category. Next, we have experiential associations. These are links between two concepts that are experienced close together in time and space. So clouds and rains. The clouds and rains are associated because it's a very cloudy day, and then you will likely to see rain, just broadly stated. So clouds associated with rains, or thunder associated with lightning. So these two concepts experience close together in time and space. There's also chronically accessible schemas. These are schemas that are easily brought to mind because they are personally important and used frequently. So for example, a friend who is super into K-pop will notice K-pop affiliated aesthetics at higher rates than someone who's unfamiliar with the genre. If you value sacrifice as a human value, reading a biography of a person, you are more likely to remember anecdotes related to sacrifice. So these chronically accessible schemas are something that are fundamental to you as a person at this moment in time, at least. So they are very, very important to you, and they're used frequently. Thus, they're chronic. They're chronically accessible. So if you're super into K-pop, you're walking through the store and you, boom, side of your eye, you didn't even realize it, boom, I see this K-pop band. And when your other friend didn't notice it at all, maybe they don't know K-pop, or they only know a little bit, but they're ultimately not chronically thinking about K-pop. They're not thinking about it a lot. Thus, the schema is not as accessible to your friend as you, the person who's always thinking about K-pop, mega stan fan. Thus, that schema is chronically accessible to you. Or you can think of it as a human value, so something like sacrifice. You just sacrifice is the ultimate human value. So you're reading a book, and the things that you're going to more likely to remember are concepts or stories related to sacrifice. because that value is very important to you. You think about it frequently. It is a part of your chronically accessible schema. And here's kind of just a rough kind of schematic of associative networks. So you can see here kind of these concepts are how concepts are cognitive related. So bringing one concept to mind can prime other concepts connected to it, sometimes without the person's conscious awareness. So just say Star Wars, then all of a sudden you're thinking about, particular movies, which you think about, and then you think about, oh, terrible. Then you think about, oh, there's too many commercials, or it's too commercial. It violates the original intention of Star Wars. And why do they do it? Because it costs money. So just in the concept of Star Wars alone, it's connected to other pieces of information in kind of this network-like fashion. So just saying the words or priming the words or numbers, episodes 4, 5, 6, that can make you more likely to think about amazing, because say you love Star Wars episodes 4, 5, 6. So priming you implicitly with episodes 4, 5, 6, you're more likely to think of amazing or how it was on VHS or something along those lines. But ultimately, point being, priming one concept can increase the likelihood of thinking and accessing other concepts, because these concepts are correlated in networks. They do not exist in complete isolation with each other. New information, our experiences are filtered through our previous experiences, and thus kind of build this kind of tree of associations. So you can also kind of think of it like branches interconnected between different trees. Results of primed behavior studies are largely inconclusive. The reliability and strength of the effect is debated. Some meta-analyses have found typically small effect sizes. In general, that is the case. So just because you prime someone unconsciously does not mean they're going to behave a particular way. Very big in kind of like the 2000s, 90s situation, the whole priming, implicit messaging, kind of subliminal messaging kind of thing. So meta-analyses have typically found a small effect sizes for the impact of priming on behavior. Now, one set of studies suggests that our experimenters' own expectations have a stronger effect on participants' behavior than subtly primed concepts, so suggesting that experimenters themselves might have unknowingly shaping participants' behaviors in priming studies. So wherein priming effects have been found, and especially greater than small effect size, some scholars argue that it's really the researchers who are unconsciously influencing the participants' behavior. Thus, maybe this experimenter effects greater than priming effects. Research suggests that people seem to be especially suggestible to primed information when the right action is ambiguous and they have to act quickly. Weingarten in 2016's meta-analysis suggested that primes have a larger effect on behavior when people are already somewhat motivated to enact that behavior. So, for example, if you're nerding out in high school, then being primed with success-related words might be likely to increase the probability of persistence during a difficult homework assignment. So kind of the idea here, if you're already motivated to engage in that behavior, maybe as a part of your identity, you're more likely to, the effects of priming may be larger. So for example, you're a nerd in high school, but you're studying and it's very, very hard, but you're super committed. You love it, man. You want to get those A's. You really value school. But you're struggling, it's a tough assignment. Well, in this case, being primed, so subtly being shown words like perseverance, book, learning, education. In those cases, those primed words or objects that only appear for a fraction of a second, they could have larger effect sizes on the person who's already a nerd, because they're already motivated and to engage in kind of learning behavior. They just maybe need a little bit of a reminder of like their identity or what it is, or whatever their ultimate goal is. Versus a kid who has like straight Fs, failing, has poor attendance, maybe growing up in a adverse environment, has an unstable family, just priming the words like education for like 0.1 second or similar words. likely to have a very small effect size. You can't just, if we could just take all the really poor performing students of the world and just prime them with little subtle messages of education, it's highly unlikely that priming is going to significantly alter their educational trajectory. Let's wrap up this lecture with a review of confirmation bias. We tend to seek out and evaluate new information so that it confirms what we already believe or feel. Ambiguous information is interpreted in a schema-confirming manner. People pay more attention to schema-consistent information. So kind of the idea here is that we're looking for confirmation of our pre-existing beliefs, and when the information is ambiguous, we're more likely to interpret that information in ways that are consistent with our schemas, those beliefs, and our worldviews. In one study, participants watched a silent video of a woman being interviewed in 1976. Participants were told about the interview, was about sex or that it was about politics. And their job was to assess the woman's emotional state. So some participants state that this woman who's being interviewed was about sex, and some of the participants were told that she was being interviewed about politics. And then again, they're being asked to assess the woman's emotional state. When participants thought the interview was about sex, they rated her as more anxious than when they thought the interview was about politics. The videotape was the same in both cases, and the woman's reactions were ambiguous. But when participants thought that the topic was sex-related, they expected the woman to be anxious over discussing such a personal topic, which suggests participants interpret any fidgeting they saw as indicating anxiety. So again, in this case here, we have two sets of participants. They're watching a video of a woman being interviewed. This woman actually works for the researchers, and she's not actually doing making any gestures that are like very easy to interpret. They're ambiguous, all right? And this, again, is a silent movie. So all you have is the body language or the movements of that woman, and the woman works for the researchers. So again, the movements are purposely ambiguous. And again, the participants are split into two groups. One group is told that the woman is being interviewed about sex. The other group is told that the woman is being interviewed about politics. And then the researchers ask the participants to assess the woman's emotional state. And again, the participants who believed the interview was about sex were more likely to report that the woman was experiencing anxiety. Why might that be the case? What is one possible interpretation? Well, the assumption that, sex is a topic that you would have anxiety talking about publicly, maybe especially like if you're a woman or something along those lines, and thus her ambiguous gestures, her fidgeting, her behaviors, her hashtag body language is now going to be interpreted through that lens, that schema about whatever gender roles, about the taboo nature of talking about sex, something along those lines, whatever those cultural values are of those participants in this given historical period. And again, this is kind of demonstrating these roles, demonstrating the impact of schemas in interpreting ambiguous situations, and how those schemas can contribute to different interpretations of the same behavior. Thus, why there is no, little spoiler, there's no such thing as universal body language. Continuing on, confirmation bias can contribute to a biased information gathering. So this is one way that confirmation biases are enacted. Schemas can lead to biased efforts to gather information. There's a tendency to seek evidence that fits rather than does not fit. A hypothesis against speech class, ladies and gentlemen. So, for example, you think like Daniel Fisher is a garbage professor. So what you're going to do is you're going to Google why Daniel Fisher sucks into Google, and then you're reading that information. But so if you think I suck as a professor, then you're not going to Google why is Daniel Fisher the best. Your point being, you have a hypothesis already that I suck, and thus you're more likely to seek out, gather information that are consistent with that schema, that previously held belief. There's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. Schemas can create the social reality that one expects. For example, kids expected to do well are given more attention and more nods and smiles, are challenged more, and are given more positive reinforcement for their successes. Students tend to respond to such behavior with more engagement and with more effort, and consequently, theoretically, more learning. If you expect someone to be friendly and social, you are likely to act in ways that elicit such behavior. If you expect someone to be unpleasant and annoying, you're likely to act in ways that provoke that kind of behavior. The more people hold these expectations, the larger the effect of one's behavior. So self-fulfilling prophecy. So here the idea is that your expectations influencing your actual social reality. So, for example, if you think you're a teacher and you think like, man, my students are dumb as shit, or whatever, at least half my students are dumb as shit. So I have that belief, and what I'm going to I'm more likely to not be as interactive or hashtag reaffirming, or hold my students that I think that are dumb as shit to high expectations. So I'm going to treat them like they are dumb. Thus, they're probably going to respond. They're more likely to respond to my behavior by decreased learning. They are going to, either implicitly or explicitly recognize that I think they're dumb, and then they are going to be less likely to be motivated to succeed in class. They're also going to, again, receive less information from me. They're going to be challenged less. They're going to have lower expectations. Thus, I'm kind of creating the conditions by which the students that I think are dumb as shit are going to actually behave like they're dumb. They're going to perform poorly on a quiz. You can do this with just friends as well. So if you think someone is going to be annoying and unpleasant, you're probably more likely to act in ways that provoke that kind of behavior. So you're going to already be irritated at that person and then thus that person has a greater likelihood of themselves being annoying. And then you're like, see, I knew it. That person was annoying. And also, the more people have those expectations, the larger the effect size. So you can imagine at a party, and everybody thinks that this one particular person is a great person, is super fun, the life of a party. And so everybody treats that person as the life of the party. So that kind of multiplicity effect of like social expectations, confirming the belief that person is friendly, and then that friendly person is going to be like, oh, everybody likes me, everybody thinks I'm friendly, I'm more likely to be friendly now. Now, it's important to note that there's only a moderate range of variability here. So if a person, or I guess you can imagine like a 7-year-old, and they're in a college level statistics class. And I'm like, all right, student, I expect 7-year-old, I expect you to be awesome. I'm going to smile. I'm going to nod. I'm going to give you all the positive reinforcement. You're going to be awesome. And then the 7-year-old fails their university level statistics. Well, this is because there is only a moderate range of kind of outcomes. There's a moderate range of variability in the behaviors, that can be shifted due to the perceiver's expectations, that self-fulfilling prophecy effect. There is a limit to it. You cannot just everybody expect an outcome and then it magically happens. There is a limit to it. Okay, let's look at some specific research about information gathering before we wrap this up. Participants in one study had a brief discussion with a conversation partner who was described to them as being an extrovert or an introvert in a 1978 study. Their job was to assess whether the description was true, and they were given a set of questions to choose from to guide their conversation. Participants tended to ask the conversation partner questions that already assumed the hypothesis was true and would lead to answers confirming the hypothesis. For example, a participant wanting to determine whether a partner was an extrovert chose to ask questions such as, quote, what kinds of situations do you seek out if you want to meet new people? If they wanted to determine whether the partner was an introvert, they chose questions such as, quote, what factors make it harder for you to really open up to people? The issue is these are leading questions. When answering a question about how a person livens up a party, for example, a person is very likely to come across as being extroverted, even if that person is not extroverted. Even an extrovert will look introverted when talking about what he dislikes about social situations. This research presents evidence that people tend to seek evidence that fits the hypothesis they are testing, rather than also searching for evidence that might not fit that hypothesis. So kind of the idea here is that if you think a person is a particular behavior or a category or have a certain set of characteristics, so in this case here, you think a person is introverted, you're more likely to ask leading questions relating to introversion. So tell me what factors makes it hard for you to open up to people. And then you'll say, whatever, I hate big crowds, or I don't know, I'm really shy, or something along those lines. And the answers to that question then are basically evidence that that person is introverted. So by the framing of the question, you're receiving information that is consistent with your prior schema. Thus, you're gathering information that is confirming your previously held schema. So it doesn't matter how, like, whatever, this kind of dichotomy is not really accurate, but whatever, which is for the purpose of the study. Say you're a 100% extrovert, but you ask that extroverted person, hey, what don't you like about social situations? Give me 10 reasons. They list 10, and then you're like, whoa, look at all this evidence. This person looks pretty introverted to me. So the point being, people's schemas can influence the questions they ask, and the questions they ask are a means in which to gather information. Thus, we confirm previously held beliefs, rather than test the accuracy of said held beliefs, according to this 1978 study. So let's wrap it up here. Does confirmation bias always occur? Revision of our view of particular people and events may occur when observations or dramatically conflict with initial expectations. For example, if you play chess with a 9-year-old and don't expect the child to show you much skill, and then the kid beats you, you are likely to revise your opinion of the child's chess ability. And when awareness of a concern about bias exists. If the target of your expectations knows you think a certain way about them, they, however, may go out of their way to try to disconfirm your expectation. So when does revisions occur? For example, when there are dramatic differences, such as this expectation that you're going to beat this kid's ass in chess, and then they beat you, and you're like, oh, okay, well, either this kid's awesome or I am bad. I need to reevaluate. Also, kind of the awareness or concern about the bias. So if you're like, oh, I don't like that I hold this bias, I'm going to try and kind of address this schema and find new ways to gather information that is not purely just based on confirmation bias. And then kind of our final bullet point, if the person thinks or understands that what your expectation of them is, and they don't frankly like it, then they may go out of their way to disconfirm it. And then that presents you with new information wherein you have the opportunity to reevaluate your previous schemas. All right, everyone. With that said, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.